Unlocking prosperity while caring for the earth. Our regional plans, one of the secret ingredients that we need to do that. You know, in 2002, that was a long time ago. 18 years ago, 2002. I was the lead resource analyst for a project called the Robson Valley Enhanced Forest Management Pilot Project Scenario Planning. What an acronym that is. Anyways, you will find it online if you looked up Robson Valley EFMPP. We were working on a project to try to find a way forward where you could have resource development and conservation in a huge watershed in the Rocky Mountain Trench in British Columbia, Canada. It's called the Robson Valley Watershed, 1.2 million hectares, huge place. But in the communities, there was this huge polarization. Like people were they were like this over logging and protection, right? Even in the grocery store, you go in the grocery store and people would be getting into it in the aisles. It was pretty rough. And when we started the project, we had this advisory group and there was so much emotion. Because people were really passionate about and it really meant a lot. There were people standing on chairs yelling. But we hung in there and we went into it with a willingness to explore. We started looking, it wasn't working at the cut block by cut block level, so we started looking at the whole watershed. And in the end, that multi-stakeholder group, they went through this regional assessment process. They were able to find enough volume in the watershed for the forest industry to continue on with its business and still be able to make recommendations to set aside these antique cedar hemlock forests where haven't seen a stand replacing event in over 1,000 years. So they were actually able to find the balance, right? And that experience for me, that really showed me that you can take the conflict right out of the community. You could unlock the prosperity that needed so badly, the jobs and the livelihood, while not compromising the critical value, which was that antique forest. So that was really the first time I got hard proof for myself. It works. Now, joining me today, as you can see, is Dr. Jill Blakely. And Jill is an associate professor at the University of Saskatchewan in Canada, right on Canada. And Jill holds PhD in geography, specializing in environmental assessment. And since 2009, she's been a faculty member of the Department of Geography and Planning and associate of the School of Environment and Sustainability. Hi, Jill.
Hello, Barry.
Jill, you've published more than 70 academic papers, book chapters, technical reports on environmental assessment.
Well,
Wow.
they add up. They add up over time. It's been a good 15 years of this, so it adds up.
Wow, you've been working hard. And Jill advises organizations like the Canadian Council of Ministers on the Environment, Transport Canada, Parks Canada, Alberta Environment, the Canadian Environmental Assessment Agency, the Manitoba Clean Environment Commission, and I'm proud to say she's faculty at the CFX Conference Series. So Jill, thanks so much for taking time out of your very busy schedule to share with us today.
Well, it's a pleasure to be with you, Barry. It always is. Thank you.
I have another surprise for all the hardcores who showed up to see this video. You get to be the first to find out that Jill is also the 2020 CE Analytic Innovation Award recipient, which is one of only 4 awards we give every year. And it's given to an individual or a group who are developing a new method, idea, or product that will result in better solutions in the field of system dynamics and or cumulative effects. And Jill is the lead editor and an author in forthcoming International Handbook of Cumulative Impact Assessment, which is truly innovative, bringing in all of these perspectives around the world. And Jill, it's going to, you were saying, I think it's maybe going to be published in May next year?
Yes. We have confirmation from the publisher that it will be issued in May 2021. So.
Wow, that's spectacular. This cumulative effects is a young discipline. And so references like these for people who are starting to work on it can be so valuable. Very innovative. So congratulations on that. And next week we'll actually give it to you.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you. I really appreciate the recognition of that project.
Yeah, it's spectacular. So, and I'll be sharing later when that actually gets published. I'll be sharing that.
Okay.
So, anyway, we got a ton to talk about. So I'm going to hit the music intro and where we're going to go.
Awesome.
All right. I love the blues. That's such a great way to start every time. CFX is an acronym that I guess I've coined, mainly because I found cumulative effects to be quite a mouthful. CFX is so easy to say. And as a systems ecologist, for me, it's this interaction of the environment, people, and economies. And it's not only the interaction, but the nesting of those systems and how they work. And if we can understand that, I think that that's going to be the pathway to figuring out how we can move forward and really, really capture the opportunities that we have, while not compromising this place, planet Earth, for future generations. So, this is a live show, so if you're there and I don't see you, you got to pop your name into the box or give me an emoticon or ask Jill or I a question, and we'll bring that up and we'll share this time with you. Thanks for joining us. Jill, I talked about my Robson Valley experience. It can be successful, but we are always finding ourselves in this project by project assessment world. And another possible pitfall is this increased risk of unintended consequences, things we weren't really planning on. Can you give us some examples that you've seen of that?
Yes, I can. And before I do that, I want to sort of lead off by saying, how very important high quality project impact assessments are, and
Right.
they all will be. And
Yes.
there is incredibly good work being done to assess projects across this country, and that has been the case for a long time. It doesn't mean that those efforts are perfect. It doesn't mean that there aren't areas to improve. But I want to start out by saying, when we talk about the regional scale, what we are not talking about a substitution of
Right.
regional assessment for project assessment. We are not saying, or I am not saying, that one is better than the other. To me, they must be linked, and they must be in partnership for both to function as best as they can. So
Yeah, thank you for saying that, because I should have said that.
Oh no, it's not. It's okay. But I know that there can be a perception that there is a dismissal of the efforts at the project level, or there can be a bit of an undermining of the good work that goes on at the project level. And I
Right.
don't want that to be the case
No.
for the intent of our conversation at all.
No.
So, to just talk to your question a little bit, what can happen when we only look at like impacts to the environment on a project by project basis? There are lots of things that get missed,
Right.
really important things that get missed because they simply aren't what gets talked about in a project setting. And so one thing that can happen is that major decisions end up being taken about the fate of a whole region without having intended to take those decisions.
Right.
And that's a huge piece that has continued to get missed over past decades. So I have a couple of examples of that. So just to take one example that I pulled recently from something I saw on Twitter. But essentially, all of the major rivers in Manitoba are now dammed except for one called the Seal River in northern Manitoba. And I'm pretty sure at no time in Manitoba's history did the public have an open dialogue or conversation to decide that it would be a good idea to dam every single major river and accept those consequences. I don't think that was ever a public debate. I don't think people knew that that would ever happen. And so, but that's what happened.
Yeah.
Without intention to make that decision.
Right.
Maybe just one other example, here in Saskatchewan, where I'm from. So Saskatchewan has almost 50% of Canada's arable land, or total acres of arable land. I have to ask, when did we decide collectively in Saskatchewan that we would drain an estimated 4.5 million acres of farmland with approximately 1,800 miles of unapproved drainage projects, causing massive disruption to the hydrological system here, especially in south central Saskatchewan? When was that ever a plan we made, a choice we made, a talk we had? It wasn't. It wasn't. It simply is the consequence of 100+ years of incremental drainage projects on farms.
Right.
As each farmer was deciding to try to improve the profitability of their farm operation, it just seemed to make sense to drain these little ponds that were seemingly not really useful. But the cumulative impact of that is incredibly massive. And we never had a conversation about that as a people publicly.
And if you were able to step back and look at the region, look at all of those lands, and then understand that there are other values like migrating birds, as an example, then you might be able to designate the most highly valuable ones for some sort of conservation. Still allow a lot of, draining maybe to go, but it's with intention and understanding of where you're going, and still making sure that the stuff that's important is still around.
Well, it is that, and it's also, if you had looked at this on a regional basis and the regional consequence, you would understand that the trade-off of doing that is you are going to sacrifice the ecological functions that the wetland complex provides, or the wetland system. And a huge one is flood control.
Right.
So you're trading off the natural ability of that land to control flood and drought. Yeah. And now we have those issues in spades. We have flooding issues and we have drought issues in spades. And that was the unintended trade-off that happened because of not having the regional perspective in mind and not having the broader societal conversation about what the impacts are.
So, what about, so you had also mentioned another one that we were talking about a couple of weeks ago about roads. And I've seen this in roads in my own personal experience, especially in BC, where, once you get a road into a valley, it's no longer a wilderness area, and then a whole bunch of conditions change. And some of those conditions are even regulatory. What would have been restrictions, they disappear. So do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So, that's another sort of facet to this issue about taking decisions about the fate of regions without really intending to.
Yeah.
And so lots of times when you have an intended regional development program, while it's being discussed, while the idea of that is percolating, in fact, what's happening on the ground is that the first projects, the first pieces of those projects are already starting to go through the approvals process. And usually that one of those early pieces is an access road.
Wow.
It's putting in that transportation vein into the region. And that by itself, that single decision, that single approval of that project can seal the fate of a region for decades and decades to come, because a road almost never disappears again. The effects that it induces, you have unleashed those effects, and they will begin well ahead of that larger development program. The effects of roads cumulatively are incredibly large, incredibly extensive. There's all kinds of effects, induced effects, that come from putting in a single road to a region that never before had a road.
Yeah.
And so we can talk about, some of those effects. I know you're familiar with some of those effects, and they range all the way from environmental effects to cultural effects to economic effects, good and bad, all of that. But there's another aspect to it, which is that an early project like that, the approval of a road, it represents sunken costs toward like it biases the rest of the decision making in favor of project approval. Because once you have spent all kinds of money, millions of dollars in a road, in road infrastructure, transportation infrastructure, that's a strong signal that more development should be associated and attached to that to rationalize or to realize the investment that you already made. So you have this sunken cost, and now other projects later on are much more likely to be approved.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a really interesting, the sunken cost fallacy is a really interesting topic in behavioral economics. And, you can roll it back to something that's really simple. I was thinking about that before the show is, you go to an all-you-can-eat buffet, right? And you paid like $18, and normally maybe you'd only pay $12 for your dinner. But I paid $18, so I'm gonna fill up. And I've done this. I've been sitting there and I'm so full, but I'm going for another plate of sweet and sour pork. That's it. I have to. I paid the money, but it's not good logic actually, because I'm going to make myself very uncomfortable. So, and then, there's all kinds of examples of how we do that when we've invested some money, and yet I think good money after bad is the cliche that talks about that. So you can, but it's really hard to ignore. And then I've also seen it like with forestry roads. You put infrastructure in, and then they become hiking trails. They become ATV routes. They become fire control access points, and you can't get rid of them.
And they become hunting access points. And you suddenly have hunting pressures on local wildlife populations, such as caribou.
Right.
That can be very important to Indigenous communities that weren't there before. It's a huge one that happens with putting in a new road. That's an unintended consequence.
An unintended consequence. So that's one thing we got to really look out for, and regional assessments can provide the context then for a project to be considered and not create that unintended consequence. It gives us that opportunity to think ahead. I think back to there's a lot of good pluses that we can get if we go to this regional approach. I think back to when in 2005 when I got a chance to work with a really cool team of scientists, 47 stakeholders in the Alberta oil sands region, and again a sort of a contentious mine by mine approach to looking at how are we going to develop this hydrocarbon asset or not, and where and to how much. And so again, we started in on a scenario planning process in that. And I remember being in the Sawridge, in a ballroom in the Sawridge Hotel in Fort McMurray, with about 50 interests around me in a U-shaped table. I felt like I was with the United Nations, and I should have had one of those white helmets on, But It was very divided, but to the group's credit, they were there committed to looking at the region and exploring. I think this is a key, is the ability to say, I'm not coming in with a purpose or a position, but I'm willing to explore first and then find something along with what we learn. And so doing that, it was 2.5 years later, but the Cumulative Environmental Management Association Sustainable Ecosystem Working Group emerged with a plan with 53 recommendations, consensus on how to move forward. And one of the things that was most interesting, it's called the Terrestrial Ecosystem Management Framework. I'll put a link to that if people are interested, 2008. But there were minimum levels of development required as well as maximums. Mm-hmm. And the minimum was put in there to make sure that the industrial development happened because it was an important element, right? The economic benefits need to happen. So, sometimes, like in a situation like that, a regional assessment could actually make a project level cumulative effects assessment easier, right?
Completely. The regional level allows you to explore different kinds of alternatives, different kinds of questions than can or would be explored in the project setting.
Yeah.
And so exactly what you said, it's an exploration. It is not a process to, demonize some uses or sort of strike down ideas. The point of it is to generate as many viable options to meet our needs as a society or as a regional group as possible,
right.
in a way that gets the most benefits for everyone. The kinds of questions that get explored there are really, really important. And what happens is if you don't provide that regional venue to explore those bigger picture questions about viable alternatives and different scenarios and how they'll benefit us, if you don't do that, what happens is people have no place to talk about that. And so project assessment hearings get hijacked by people who feel unheard. Yeah. And that is why you end up with really contentious hearings where people are arguing, where people are divided. Well, because it's not the right forum for some of those questions. So, that cannot be, probably stated enough in terms of what the value of a regional assessment is.
So we've been talking about like project level assessment is super important. Regional assessment is really important. How do we connect the two?
Okay, so this is, this is the subject of current research because really what we know so far is that they should be connected.
Yeah.
Okay? And in academia, we call that tiering. Okay, so that we imagine that there are these great connections between these different levels and that they communicate back and forth. And that sounds great, but is that really happening?
Right.
And so research is just starting to look into how that happens, the extent to which it happens, and the best way for that to happen. And to be honest, there isn't a lot of evidence, a lot of good recorded examples or examples that are shared publicly and widely that it is happening. So, if you are a practitioner and that it is happening, in terms of the projects you've been working on and some of the regional plans or assessments you're connecting to, please get that information out into the public realm because we simply don't have a good public record of if and where and when that is happening and how. But that being said, I'll just emphasize one really important point about how the two should be connected.
Yeah.
And how they should be connected, one major way is through the valued components that are assessed regionally. And there certainly is, the term valued ecosystem component or valued component, that's sort of, you have to unpack that by itself as, is that the right kind of terminology? But for now, Let's just use it. It's the accepted terminology. But my point is that we have to be really careful about what we decide to assess regionally, because once you've done that, that's what you've got. Yeah. And the subsequent projects will or will not have something to look to depending what was assessed on that regional scale. So if regionally we only look at a few wildlife species, how useful is that then to the project practitioner when they are trying to assess the state of the regional ecosystem, the
Right.
sustainability of the regional ecosystem, and their project's contribution to that?
Yeah.
How are we going to be able to do that if we haven't set up the regional assessment well in order to provide really good information about the state, like the viability of the regional
Right.
ecosystems?
Yeah.
So it's really important.
And so for people who aren't familiar with like the technical, the valued ecosystem component as an example, you can just think of like, something that's really important to us, like clean drinking water or grizzly bear or salmon or something like that, or spadefoot toad. And it's been my experience that those indicator selections are often, they're either driven, say, by the fact that the species or a habitat is at risk of extinction or extirpation, at least. Or what I like to do in my work often is to find a keystone species that, if it's doing well, I have a lot more confidence that all of the things that are supporting it are also doing well. Mm-hmm. So like grizzly bears are a good example of that, or because there's so many elements have to be in place for them to be able to be thriving, that if they are thriving, you've got a lot of confidence in that. So yeah, it's important, because if you go the other way around, and I've seen this, and let's use my example of spadefoot toad, that's in only in small little habitats. It's very vulnerable because there's not many of them. But how does that speak to a big region where it's not regionally abundant? And so what you're saying there, like if that was what we used as our target, we could miss the boat on a lot of other important things.
Well, okay, so this is another really important point to emphasize, that it's both and. Okay, so focusing on the keystone species, great approach. Focusing on species at risk that are listed, great approach. Focusing on some of those really vulnerable, almost like canary in the coal mine species, great approach. All of that, excellent, do it. But what I'm saying is we need to add to that. We need to add to that when we're looking regionally. And I don't mean necessarily just add by putting everything in the pot again. Back in history, that was the early criticism of impact assessments, was that we were putting everything in the assessment pot and it was too much and too overwhelming. And that was where the valued ecosystem component concept came from, to focus on the most important things. Right. So we do want to focus, but what I'm suggesting is regionally, we have to start focusing on assessing components of ecosystems that tell us something broader about the sustainability or the health of those ecosystems. And I like to sort of flag the concept that's out there. This isn't my work, and it doesn't come from impact assessment, the field of impact assessment. It comes from the field of ecology, which is to try to look more toward assessing ecosystem services. Right. Okay. So can we do more in our regional assessments to figure out how hydrological functioning is happening or not? Like, is the hydrological cycle compromised or not compromised? Right. What is the state of fresh water availability? Quality or quantity? Another key supporting ecosystem service might be primary production. So what has happened to soils, in that region? Are the soils viable the way that they used to be? Soil conditions are so critical to everything that comes after that, including all the plants and the animals that can depend on those plants. It comes from soils, it comes from minerals.
And it's the same. It's the same on the economic side. We get focused on something like GDP or jobs, but what we're really looking at is quality of life and affordability for people. And then you can connect those dots the same way. And so it's, yeah, I love what you're saying there. It's just, it's so important to not lose that perspective of the system outcome, right? Which is what we experience, because we get real focused on counting the rocks and the leaves and those micro details. But yeah, the thing that nourishes us is the outcomes that system produces.
Well, absolutely. And you know, this speaks to how the regional assessment and the project assessment can complement one another, because we still need to look at those specifics. You know, a project has a specific set of impacts on a specific number of variables. Well, we still need to know that, but we can't judge the severity of those impacts if we don't really know much about the regional ecosystem function to this point and the trends there. So these are two different kinds of information that can, you know, balance each other and inform each other.
I just adding, you seeing me looking down here, Martin Eiffel, who's from the Yukon, and we've been talking back and forth. He's just posted a comment. He's been with us. I guess he's the one that gave us the thumbs up.
Yeah.
And he said, great discussion. Sadly, I have to run. And I just asked him if he's got a question or a point to add, because we've had these very same conversations, he and I, about how governments decide on land dispossession. You know, how they take land that's in the control of the Crown and decide where to allow human settlement to expand, as an example, a subdivision even. So... but I'm going to move into our next segment, because you said, like, sometimes we have to look to another field, and that was a perfect segue for the Forest of Whispering Speakers. So, okay, I said it was going to be funky. I'm going to fire the producer who chose that music. Anyway, Jill, do you like ballads, historical ballads in music?
I guess I liked them a lot when I was in grade 7 and 8, and it was the first slow dances that we were allowed to be part of. So that I liked it a lot then. Yeah.
Bon Jovi. Yeah. So, you know, I think we can learn a lot from musical lyrics, and I think as scientists, you know, we could really benefit from the creative side that artists bring in the messaging. So I go for inspiration to lyrical writings, and I like to look in pop music, stuff that I like, rock and pop. So one of my favorite bands is Dire Straits, and Mark Knopfler, who's the lead guitarist but also lead singer, and he writes most of their stuff. His lyrics are really strong. He's like Gord Downey, tragically. Mm-hmm. And Mark wrote this song called The Telegraph Road. And he wrote it while sitting in the front of the tour bus. Imagine yourself. You know what it's like when you're in the front and you see that you've got the big window? He wrote it there, driving down the Telegraph Road, which is a highway in Michigan, on his way to Detroit. They were going to a concert. The song is 14 minutes long, so we can't do that. And actually, I'm just going to talk to the lyrics here a little bit. But he was thinking about the evolution of how this big highway, 6-lane highway he was on, came to be, and so here's how it goes. I think this is so relating to this idea that we've been talking about today.
You're going to sing? You sing it?
I'll roll with the melody, kinda. But I'll be fair to everybody, not make them listen to me sing. So, a long time ago came a man on a track, walking 30 miles with a sack on his back, and he put down his load where he thought it was the best. He made a home in the wilderness. He built a cabin and a winter store. He plowed up the ground by the cold lake shore, and the other travelers, they came walking down the track, and they never went further, and they never went back. Then came the churches, and then came the schools, then came the lawyers, and then came the rules. Then came the trains and the trucks with their load, and the dirty old track was the Telegraph Road. And then came the mines, and then came the ore, and then came the hard times, and then came the war. Telegraph song sang about the world outside. You know, the messages coming in. the connection there. And the Telegraph Road got so deep and so wide. And the song moves on to talk about then economic collapse and this guy's dreams disappearing because of unemployment. And it reminds me of a couple of things. Really, the boom and bust cycles we've seen so many times in primary resource extraction economy. And how the place you came there because it was so beautiful isn't beautiful anymore. So at the end of the song he says, "But just believe in me, baby, and I'll take you away from out of this darkness and into the day. From these rivers of headlights and these rivers of rain, from the anger that lives on the streets with these names. Because I've run every red light on memory lane. I've seen desperation explode into flame, and I don't want to see it again." And, like, I think of, is this an artist's view of the unintended consequences of unbridled growth? And what can we learn from that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, pretty powerful.
Yeah, it's. I think it's a great song for anybody who's interested in, understanding, because all of those things, it's like you were saying, every person that was doing something was not trying to ruin the place, but cumulatively, that's what it became. And, we see it over and over again with eutrophication of lakes and, as you said, draining all the wetlands. All right, so Barry's creative side. You can actually check out that song. I'll put it up here. Telegraph Road. I'm putting a picture on the screen of what the Telegraph Road is now. This huge, massive 8-lane freeway, completely packed with cars. But Love Over Gold is the album. And so if you want to go support Dire Straits, I don't think they really need the support. But if you want to do that, enjoy some good music, download it. So, yeah, Jill. How could we shift our conversations to more effectively, bring in these kinds of perspectives? Like, a lot of times that's what this connection is. It's about people. It's not about, a paper war. It's often, as we've experienced, when you get in the room with somebody and get to talk about stuff and have a conversation, you can move the bar.
Well, there's a few things that occur to me. One of them, just to be more specific about the evolution of regional assessment in Canada, people have been experimenting with this for 20 years, and we're starting to more formally experiment with it at the federal level. And there are some sort of early trial and error type scenarios happening, and some conversations about what regional assessment needs to be or could be in Canada. And I think continuing those conversations are really, really important. So for example, there was a recent regional assessment that was done for offshore oil drilling off the east coast of Newfoundland. And so that assessment was completed, and it sort of served as, I guess maybe it was looked to as a bit of a reason or a basis to excuse some, federal project assessments in that region. The minister sort of said, well, a regional assessment has been done, therefore we don't really need to do, project assessments for this area, even though the area that was being permitted for drilling actually overlapped with a sensitive marine refuge established in 2017. And so, I think there was a bit of confusion there about what a regional assessment is and is not meant to do federally, but environmental interest groups are now, pushing back and saying, well, hang on, not so fast. The regional assessment was actually flawed. It was incomplete. Right. It's not a basis to sort of excuse the overlapping of, permits for oil exploration and a protection of sensitive marine habitat. So,
Right.
How do we sort of shift perspectives? Well, it is through those kinds of public national conversations, to try to get to a place or an understanding of what regional assessment, what it is, what it can do for us, and how it complements project assessment. So
Yeah. So
that's
what you were saying, it's not about replacement. It's about
right,
adding. And
right.
so
And
you're just fueling the conversation by understanding what's regionally important and then going local with the project.
yeah, and there are examples in the world where, if a regional assessment has been completed, project proponents may be exempted from a project assessment, but that is like the example I'm thinking of. That why that happens is that the project proponent can show that everything about the proposed project complies with the stringent, conditions that were set regionally.
Which
So
to
it's
do
a
that,
legal step.
they're going to have to do an assessment of some sort.
Yeah, so you can streamline, project assessments. You could sort of, I don't know. There are ways that you can reduce the amount of work maybe that has to be done
Yeah.
project wise.
Right.
But this is assuming a strong set of regional guidelines that proponents have said they will adhere to.
So it's
So
really
anyway,
it's the beginning. It's the beginning of the conversation.
yes, that's right. It's the beginning of the conversation, and the conversation then looks different, and that's a good thing.
Right.
Okay. But I mean, thinking more
Oh,
broadly, how can we shift conversations and perspectives? Well, I think we have to throw as much technology at this as possible. We are now living in a time when we can use the extremely powerful tools of data visualization or simulation, or even just simple movies or documentaries, or there's many ways now that we can visually illustrate to people what cumulative effects really
yeah.
are, how they happen, where they are located, or where these effects are located. And we don't have enough of that material yet. There
I'm
are
working
some,
on it. I'm trying.
yeah. And yeah, I've had half a mind myself to like somehow dig up another 40 hours a week just to work on those kinds of visual tools.
Yeah.
And that is happening. Like, it's starting to happen even within project impact assessment. Proponents are now harnessing the power of technology to use really powerful visualization tools so that the public very quickly can see, like, let's
Yeah.
say a progression series, like a time progression series of
Yeah.
images that shows, okay, under this kind of development scenario, those kinds of effects would happen. And showing it visually is so much more powerful than asking people to read volumes and volumes and volumes of papers, right?
All
So
right. So
go ahead.
I wasn't going to say anything about this, but I have a land use tutorials set of videos here on my YouTube channel. It's 14 videos showing exactly that. 3D map, time simulations of looking at cumulative effects. Historically, from pre-European contact in North America out into the future, looking at the shift of ecosystems with climate change. So if you look on the channel, there's a playlist called Land Use Tutorials and a whole series of videos there. Have a look at that. It's one way. It's one way. But I gotta stop you because I'm not gonna miss my opportunity for Jill's rapid fire questions.
Okay.
And I see we're nearing the end, and you might be strategizing to get out of that, but there's no way. So this is the best part of the whole show for me, but it's a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun. So the idea is that you answer the question, quickly, first response. It's nothing dangerous here, but it usually sparks a little bit of fun. So, are you ready?
Yes.
Okay. Now, you don't always have to have a one word, but no paragraphs.
Okay.
Okay. What color's your toothbrush, Jill?
Pink.
Pink. If you could be an animal, what would you like to be?
Cat.
Why?
They just have relaxing down to a T.
That's so true. They're so chill. How many books have you read in 2020 so far?
I have partially read probably 50 books, but it's like I can't complete a book these days. I just keep skipping to the next thing.
Uh, are you an Aries by chance? Because
Aquarius.
oh, okay, okay, yeah, okay. Prairies or mountains?
Mountains.
But she
I was born
lives
in
in
Kamloops.
she lives in the prairies.
Yeah.
On a scale of 1 to 10, how cool are you, Jill?
9? I think I'm
Oh
pretty
yeah,
cool.
that's what I like. Okay, finish this sentence. When I dance, I look like.
Awesome. I can do that.
All right. When I was thinking about me, I was going to say Gumby.
Oh,
All right. So, who's your favorite band or singer?
the National. I love the National out of the States.
Oh,
Yeah.
I don't know them.
Check them out. I think they're the United States answer to Tragically Hip.
Oh,
I
very
love
cool.
music. Yeah.
Wow. High intensity interval training or a long slow walk?
Hit for sure.
What's your favorite season?
Oh, I'm gonna go summer.
And what's your favorite thing to do in summer? Because that's my favorite season too.
Oh, just anything outside. Like as I'm getting older, just anything outside.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. Connecting with the land.
yes, exactly. Yeah.
Or the lake if you're water skiing. All right. One last question. Live stream or pre-record?
You know what? I'm gonna say live stream.
Yeah.
Now, 'cause it's really fun. Yeah.
Way to go. Woohoo. All right. So we're on to the last section here, which is the CFX library. And each guest, I asked them to share a reference that they love that others could look to, and see some of this other information from another perspective other than ours. So the floor is yours, Jill.
Okay. Well, I want to draw people's attention to an exhibition called the Anthropocene Project, which I had no idea existed, and I randomly ran into when I was visiting Toronto a couple years ago, and the exhibition was visiting the Royal Ontario Museum. And it was so powerful. I did not know. This was an in-depth visual exploration of cumulative impacts upon the globe. And it spoke to me like nothing I've ever seen. And it's a multidisciplinary body of work by a few people, Nicholas DePensier, Edward Bertinsky, and Jennifer Beichwal. And they have produced images that are transmitted in various ways, one of which is through like a really awesome coffee table book, which I bought, but also through just different simulations, augmented reality, film, all kinds of different manners of communication visually. And essentially, they bring to life the stark realities of what cumulative impact looks like upon our Earth since the advent of the Anthropocene age, which, of course, as we know, was in the mid-20th century. So the message there, and the reason why I think this reference is just so powerful, is that it really speaks to the pace and the scale of change and how those two factors are super critical for us to be aware of. So it's not just that things are changing, it's the pace at which things are changing and the unbelievable scale at which things are changing. And they also go so far as to show how the impacts or the outcomes of that disproportionately affect certain populations around the world, of course, including Indigenous populations. So that has been such an inspirational body of work for me, and I would recommend it to anybody who's interested in cumulative impacts.
Yeah, great. And so as you were talking there, I put it up on the screen in front of us. Cool. So people could see. It is really amazing. I also, just as closing on that or building on it, there's also a piece written by Roger Boyd, it was first published in Humanities Test in April of 2017, and I'm just showing people here on the screen the post as it's shared on resilience.org. And, he talks about the fact that we're close to the point where the Earth might be tipping over and starting to roll by itself and ending the short Anthropocene. And it's interesting we talk about this. I sometimes think about this in climate change. If we delay too long, the oceans that drive everything could systematically shift. They could reverse from being sinks to emitters. And if we get to that point, it might be out of our hands. So the Anthropocene could be short. That's what he's proposing, unless we do something different. So I love your reference. People should definitely go look. That it's visually compelling. And I think we really need that. We need to be able to experience things, even though rationally in our mind we might think about things. It's hard unless you experience it. That's why I always spend time out on the land experiencing that realm. And I see that even with things like COVID, like if it's not in your community and you're not seeing anybody and you don't know anybody that's got it, it's hard to imagine what it's like. And so the more we can connect ourselves with these perspectives, and Anthropocene is that project. It's so visually compelling you can't not be engaged. So thanks for sharing that.
You're welcome.
Sadly, it's time to end the show, and I would keep going, but I understand that Jill has to go to a thesis defense as well. So so we cannot hold her up on that. I would just like to invite people, if you're interested in this, two things. Do hit subscribe. I at first thought, people are just trying to serve themselves. But here's how it helps me, and I subscribe to people, is that I get a notice. If I'm interested in their content, when something else comes out, it helps. And then it also comes up in my search. So it means I got to do less work. And because this is a live show and I want you to participate, you're going to get a notice. This is going live. Barry and Jill are on live, for crying out loud. And then the other is to invite you to go to my page at barryjwilson.com and click on the stories, which is actually a blog, but I like to call it stories. And I'm sharing stuff there. Leave me a comment or a note and tell me what maybe Jill and I will write a story for you guys. So get engaged. It's important to be involved and to be listening, but it's also way more important to be in the conversation, right, Jill?
Absolutely. Yeah,
Absolutely.
Totally.
So that's what we need, and we can't make you do it. You got to do it yourself. So I just want to thank you again, Jill, for this awesome opportunity to spend this time with you. I've had the privilege of getting to know Jill reasonably well over the last couple of years. And people can find you at the University of Saskatchewan, right?
Yep.
If they want to follow up with you in your research.
Yes.
All right.
Yep.
And watch for her book, May 2021, Handbook of Cumulative Impact Assessment. Thanks, Jill.
Thank you, Barry. It was awesome. I appreciate the opportunity.
Fantastic. Awesome.
Yeah.